Hey, I'm the Polyamorous Librarian. It is January 11th. It is a day for new books to drop, but I've got nothing new to talk about. I actually have a couple of things that are coming up that I'm going to be reviewing probably next week, which include Devon and Chris Plan a Wedding and Lisa Lutz's The Accomplice, which I'm really excited to talk about because I've been a Lisa Lutz fan since she was doing the Spellman Files, and it's been very strange to watch her go from writing like these really funny family mystery comedy things to these like moody atmospheric thrillers. But that's going to be some other time. This week I just have a couple of things to go over with you. First off is a glitch on Goodreads. I know I talked about one last time, but I have another one this time. As Told by Bex, who reviews mainly like horror and other cool books, found herself down by 300 followers on Goodreads this week. And hey, what's going on with that? Goodreads isn't saying she hasn't done anything wrong. So I was one of those people, so I can confirm this totally happened. I was following her last week. This week, had to refollow. So check your followers on Goodreads. I don't know if this is just another New Year's glitch. Probably it is. Other thing that I wanted to talk about, BookRiot. I don't think I talked about this last time, but I really wanted to talk about this and completely forgot about it. They have a reading log, and it is fantastic. So I've been using that too, and I said I wasn't going to, and I completely caved. And I love it because it makes charts and graphs. I'm such a sucker. If you go to the BookRiot website, there you can find the link there, and then it'll open up in like Google Sheets. I love it, and they have a video tutorial which is really great and easy to follow. Lot of data on there, but you can play around with it, which I really enjoyed. There's a couple things that I've played around with there, like I've deleted a bunch of columns, things I just don't need. There was maybe like one or two things I didn't understand. I use my iPad, so there's a couple things I can't play around with on there that I really like to. One of them is that like I am using it to track everything, which includes the audiobook I started a couple days before the new year, but it's really mad about that. It's like, oh, no, you can't put in anything that you started in 2021. Well, I want it to stop saying that, which means that I'm going to have to move to a desktop version to actually look into Google Sheets to see where the formulas are and to tell them, no, stop giving me an error. It's not an error. I'm just doing things a little differently. And it's just one audiobook. Calm down. So my book club, like I said last time, is doing a themed monthly challenge to clear our own shelves. I'm on my, I want to say third, maybe fourth book, and I'm not quite hitting the wall, but it's a short story collection, and it's all zombies, and it's all like guys writing zombies. I think maybe out of the whole thing there are like 2 women authors, which is hilarious because if the book had been written 10 years later, which is last year, I believe, that it would be a very different list of who was writing. There's a reason that I don't read a lot of guys anymore. I mean, I still read, I've read about a half men authors so far this year, and it's because I've been very picky about it. It's who I'll read is mostly guys that I've read before, and then I'll like read maybe like a handful of new authors, but based on recommendations from specific people, specific authors who are like, hey, this guy's great, and I'll be like, okay, cool, that probably means that he doesn't like treat women like objects, or he doesn't try to write from a women's perspective where he tries to get into their head by like making them try on a whole bunch of shoes or eat a bunch of ice cream or whatever. I'm very much, I'm in my 40s, and I'm very much from the 1980s, early 90s, write women like they're just people school. And even that kind of bothers me at this point, because it means that if you're a guy writing a woman who just acts like a guy but she's a woman, it just means that you're not really getting a lot of good feedback, and that everybody all the way up is probably all guys, you know, turtles all the way down, guys all the way up. Like, one of my favorite authors throughout my 20s and early 30s is Jennifer Crusie, and she wrote a couple of books with she's a romance novelist who wrote a couple of books with a guy who wrote like military and paranormal military thrillers. And watching the two of them collaborate, both through the way that they wrote on blogs and posts about each other and talking about each other, and then in the books themselves, was really, really cool process, because it did mean that they had to break down a lot of stereotypes and a lot of societal programming. And I think that's one of the things about writing and reading men, is that I will pretty much read any guy who's working on breaking down those things or has broken down those things. If you show me a guy who writes a woman like he understands them, like he's hung out with them his whole life, and he writes a woman character who sounds like a woman character, I'm in. I'll read everything that he's ever written. But if you show me a guy who's like, this book will be cooler written from a woman's perspective because then it'll have a more diverse audience, that woman is not going to act like a woman. At best, she'll act like a guy who is a woman. Yeah, not my fave. I'm not even gonna get into it. Like, I'm not gonna start like slamming X-Men writers. It's on my Twitter. It's there if you look. It's on my Goodreads. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's just as tough. You know, I've heard guys complain about how men are written in books. And I feel like the difference is that when women write men in books that are written for women, they're writing men as the best that they can think of, which is that the men are the kindest, the bravest, the strongest, the whateverest. And then when men write women for a lot of their media, but not all of it, but a lot of their work, women are not much. Trophies and objects and things to be won, and somebody to argue with before you kiss. Anyway, so I'm reading, you know, all this stuff, and then I'm trying to like fit all the things that have due dates in between them. And then I couldn't help it. I read some other stuff in between. I read, basically, I have my audiobook every single night that I fall asleep to. I listen to maybe 2 minutes of it before I fall asleep. So right now I'm listening to a 30-hour Dickens novel. So it's going to be a while. Not as long as Alan Moore's Jerusalem, which took me 11 months. It's great. Do not recommend listening to it as you fall asleep. But Dickens, yes, absolutely Dickens. And so, but then right before I fall asleep, I always get this like, I'm not actually tired, even though I'm completely exhausted, and I take melatonin, and so I know exactly when I'm tired. But then I open Hoopla, and I'm like, look at all the comics I could be reading right now. So I read Sheets and Delicates, which is a middle grade series. It's not really a series so much as it was a book and then a sequel, and it is fantastic. Highly recommended. It's a very thoughtful look at being a tween. It's also intensely cute and funny at times, but the moments that are like melancholy really get to you. They're just, I felt like You know those books that you read them and they just make you moody, but like in that best way? It's like they grab your mood and then you're feeling whatever the book is feeling. That's what it felt like to read Sheets and Delicates, but at the same time, like, you're smiling through the whole thing because it's adorable. It's a story of a girl who is she's struggling because she's basically taken on her mother's role after her mother's death, and her father is just, he's completely checked out, and she's trying to navigate, you know, being a tween. It's just a mess. But then there's this ghost, and he's the ghost of an 11-year-old, and he decides he wants to go back to where people are, and their lives become enmeshed, and it's really cute and funny, but also sad and beautiful. And the sequel, I thought that the sequel could not have affected me more, and I was wrong. I cried a lot. I also read Young Hellboy, which, now I'm a huge Hellboy fan, huge. Spent my pandemic reading Hellboy. It has a problem, a tone problem. It feels like it should be a kid's story, but it's not quite a kid's story. And then, because it's not quite a kid's story, the thing that makes it feel like a kid's story doesn't quite work. It like fence sits whether or not it's made for kids, and as a result, it's not as enjoyable as it could be. Like, it's trying too hard to be both things, like accessible to Hellboy fans and accessible to kids. And I felt the same way about, I forget if it was called like Little Hellboy or whatever. It was, you know, Art Balthazar, who did Tiny Titans. Tiny Titans was amazing because it was made for kids. And if adults laughed at it, there were lots and lots of little jokes in there that kids would not get, you know, that were made for like adults. You know, there would be like a tiny little, you know, final, like, you know, they'd be kids at school and then there'd be a finals crisis. And as an adult, you would laugh because Final Crisis is a comic book reference that kids aren't going to get. But, you know, ha ha ha, I'm an adult, ha ha ha, pat myself on the back, I get the joke. And I was hoping for that with that Hellboy book, but it wasn't there. It was cute. But again, they could have leaned one way or the other more. And, you know, as an adult, I would have adored a tiny little Hellboy that was written just for adults, or I would have adored a tiny little Hellboy that was written just for children, and instead it felt like it was not quite cute enough, and nor was it for adults. So while Young Hellboy was a cute story, it wasn't cute enough to be just for kids, but it was like too cutesy to be like, hey adults, this book is for you. Like, adults on Goodreads were giving it like 3 stars because they were like, it's not a great Hellboy story, which is not. But it's not a great kid's story either, because it feels more like it's a Hellboy story, but it feels less like it's a Hellboy story than it is a kid's story, but it feels less like it's a kid's story than it's a Hellboy story. Fence sitting. Don't do it. Pick one. Just go with it. We would have been fine either way. Honestly, I would have rated it a star higher if it had just picked something. Which is not to say that I didn't enjoy it. It's funny because I was talking to one of my best friends, Amy. She's fantastic, and I love her so much. And, you know, she knows me really well. But we were talking about like Ted Lasso, and I was talking about Beard After Hours, which is like, I just rewatched it and I love it. And I was talking to her and she's like, wow, do you know that if I didn't know that you loved this, I would think that you hated it? And I was like, no, what? No. Apparently, when I'm talking about things, when I critique things, I sound like I absolutely hate them. I don't. I like them. I like them a lot. Charlie Jane Anders talks about this thing called Book Tide, which is where you spend, you know, holiday money on books from like local places, which is great. And I was like, hey, my other best friend, Greg, keeps talking about, you know, this local bookstore, this local bookstore. So I bought him his present, but it hasn't come in yet. And then I got Christmas money from my mother, and I was like, I don't like anything in the whole wide world ever at all. I was in a mood. And then I was like, you know what? If there's one thing I can do, it's like support all the authors on Twitter whose books I have retweeted about all year long. Why don't I put my money where my retweet button was? And so I bought a lot of books. But the bookstore was closed for, hi kitty. The bookstore was closed for seasonal inventory. And so I think they opened back up like today. So maybe my books, which all had to be ordered, of course, will be in soon, and then I'll have even more books to talk about. I actually ordered like, I think 8 books by the same author. Happy birthday. So exciting. What'd you do? What'd you get? What have you done for Booktide? I think you should do something for Booktide, and you should absolutely talk about it, and you should use the hashtag Booktide, just like Charlie Jane Anders wants you to. You should totally get the new Charlie Jane Anders book. So good. Pre-order it. So good. It's the second in a series. If you haven't read the first one, you should order that, and then you should pre-order the next one. So good. Yes. Hashtag Booktide.